Hi, welcome to another episode of Swarajya Direct Line. Today I have with me my colleague, Senior Editor Harsha Bhatt, and we are going to talk about the lockdown extension which has been just announced by the government. Already the districts were divided into green, orange and red zones, and the extension will be taking into account these classifications. So to walk us through what this extension really means, Harsha, walk us through the exemptions first. What has been allowed, what has not been allowed?
Hi. While the extension news came as a shock for many people, but to be honest, it's not really a lockdown at the scale at which it was initially announced. So they have eased out. So the focus earlier was on Jaan hai to Jahan hai, but now it is moving to accommodate people's needs, the needs to earn, the need for basic human activity. But yes, the wants can wait is what the current announcement signals. So basically, under the new guidelines, a limited number of activities will stay prohibited throughout the country, irrespective of what zone your district or your region falls into. So this includes the travel by air, rail, metro, and any kind of interstate movement by road. Schools and colleges will have to continue to be shut. So will any kind of place where you can have mass gathering of people or large public gatherings like hotels, cinema halls, malls, gyms. All of this will continue to be shut, as well as places of religious worship or any kind of public gathering. But this that while that stays as a pan India thing, in green zones, that is where you have no cases as in the last 21 days. A lot of things have been permitted. I mean, life is almost back to normal in the green zones. Like all activities are permitted, except for the ones which I mentioned. Even buses can operate with up to 50% seating capacity. All goods traffic is permitted. No cargo movement can be stopped, like except at the between the states maybe, and you don't need a separate pass for any of this movement. So all other activities are permitted, which means this is basically easing out the burden. Like, if don't you think it's a very good way to ease out the economic burden, given that the lockdown has been bearing very heavy on the country for now?
Yes, well, to speak about the economic perspective of the extension, now, let me put a number forward, which will give you a very interesting perspective of the third lockdown that we have. There are 130 red zones in India, around 284 orange zones, and 319 green zones. So, if you look at it, we have a minority of the red zones. So, to say that the extended lockdown is actually another lockdown extension similar to what we saw previously would be an over exaggeration to begin with. Now, it's a good thing that they're taking the economics into account. For long, I felt that the government was playing it too safe, focusing only on preventing lives, but we want to ensure it doesn't become an economic nightmare. Now, with allowing the activities even in red areas, some which are very instrumental to economic recovery, it's a good sign. The second thing I would be looking forward, now that most MSMEs will come back online, shops will go back, and some eventually by the end of May, we'll see a lot of economic activity happening. I see a greater role for banks here. Already, a lot of steps have been taken on the monetary front, they have been taken on the fiscal front as well. The rates have been reduced so that the lending is available, the credit is available. So I would see banks play a larger role as we keep going forward, because a lot of medium, small, micro enterprises, they would require credit because the last 5 weeks
Also
of
for
lockdown.
I think even in the red zones, Tushar, manufacturing is being enabled because special economic zones, export oriented units, industrial estates, all these are permitted even in the red zones, outside the containment
Right.
areas, of course. And even the movement of individuals is being permitted. Construction activity in urban areas is being permitted, of course not with outside workers, with in situ workers. So we're seeing activity on that part also being permitted.
That's a very interesting question because I'm in a red zone right now, and just a kilometer away from me, there's actually a containment zone. The area has been cordoned off completely. So, to explain you further, when you have a containment zone like that, of course, the guidelines say there'll be increased surveillance. There'll be door-to-door surveillance, compulsory installation of the Arogya Setu apps, and things like that, institutional quarantine. So, it's a very interesting thing. What they're essentially trying to do here is gradually ensure that the transformation of red zones happens into the orange zone and eventually into a green zone. So even if by May 15 we can bring down the number of red zones to less than 80, at currently it stands at 130, it would be quite an achievement. Again, most of the red zone districts, they are in the metro cities: Bombay, Delhi, Pune, Kolkata. these are cities where most of your red zones really are, and these are areas of high population density. But again, given there are rules which allow economic recovery to happen, I think it's a very smart move. And one more thing,
Yeah,
a lot of people.
as far as the high density aspect that you mentioned, Tushar, one interesting announcement by today's advisory is that given that districts have more than one municipal corporations at certain places, in case and these municipal corporations with high density of population have a greater chance of infection being high in these areas outside the borders can be classified into a different zone, it says, and economic activity can resume there. That's a very interesting aspect of permitting and facilitating economic activity there.
Yes, I think the government has taken every stakeholder opinion into account here. One thing a lot of people would be interested in knowing is why couldn't we have gone for a complete opening? The simple reason for that is that would have rendered the work done in the last 5 weeks pointless. So even if we had gone for a complete opening, as many had suggested, because a calibrated opening will have its own set of confusions, it will have some inter-district issues in terms of administration and things like that, just like you mentioned right now. But it's a good thing they've gone for a calibrated opening for the 2 weeks. And again, I'll re-emphasize the number. We have 130 red zones, 284 orange zones, and more than 300 green zones. So majority of our zones are already in the orange and the green sphere. So it's not like we have a lot of restrictions in place.
So how do you see this panning after May 17? Because there are still like cab aggregators are not allowed to function anywhere, except I think in green zones, that too with minimum number of passengers. Auto rickshaws can't fly. A lot of movement is still restricted and a lot of sectors are still prohibited from functioning. So by the time it's May 17, do you see this easing out a little more, or how do you think things will pan in the next 2 weeks?
See, in the next 2 weeks, what we will be looking at is the number of cases in the red zones, particularly, and in the orange zones. The hope would be that the orange zones do not eventually go back to being red zones, and the red zones, the hope would be the red zones do become orange zones. The number of cases will be very carefully monitored in these zones, and the containment zones there are, the surveillance there is. The longer term objective, in the May end, I'm looking at a complete gradual opening of the economy one by one. Even I think inter-district transport should be in place. By June, we should be seeing the airlines and trains in place, but it eventually will depend on these 130 red zones, how the number of cases come out to be. But for now, I think it's a very smart move by the government. There are, of course, going to be some confusion given there's so many layers of administration. There will be certain confusion. But if the last 5 weeks are taken, factored into account, I think the nation has done well. So no reason to be pessimistic about the next two as well.
Thank you so much, Tushar. We hope that May 17 brings us good news and better news than what we've been hearing so far. See you on the next episode of Swarajya Direct Line.
Thanks, Harsha.